Let's not overcomplicate this. Logan Price, Chief Executive Officer, said, tapping the table as if that settled everything. We need speed, not hesitation. I was mid-sentence when he cut me off again. I had been explaining why one long-standing client account could never be fully automated without triggering regulatory scrutiny. Logan turned to Tom Reeves instead and smiled. That's exactly the mindset we're moving away from, he said. Lean, scalable, future-ready. The word future hung in the room like an accusation. For 6 weeks. I'd been ordered to train Tom under the banner of knowledge transfer, not succession, not transition, transfer, as if 18 years of judgment, context, and restraint could be flattened into slides and handoffs. Tom nodded enthusiastically, repeating phrases like AI-driven efficiency and risk normalization, while I explained again why some problems were handled manually, quietly, and with discretion. I'm Freya Boyd, Senior Manager of Client Risk and Data Integrity. I didn't generate applause. I prevented subpoenas. I kept regulators calm, clients loyal, and mistakes small enough that executives never had to explain them. Logan Price ran the company on optics and momentum. I ran the part that absorbed consequences when momentum went wrong. The final meeting was scheduled as a check-in. It lasted 9 minutes. Logan spoke first. Your role no longer aligns with where we're going. Dana Whitlock from HR slid the paperwork toward me before I could respond. This is a lawful position elimination, she said smoothly. Effective immediately. Tom sat beside Logan. Silent now, hands folded. Already treated like an upgrade. Logan praised his decisive energy. He didn't mention my name again. I didn't argue. I didn't remind them of the crises I'd contained or the clients I'd kept from walking. My silence seemed to irritate Logan more than anger would have. When Logan added, "EAT will deactivate your access by end of day," I finally spoke. I smiled not warmly, not bitterly. Before you deactivate my access, I said, evenly. You may want to review 10 years of customer data. Good luck. The room froze. Then Logan laughed, thin and dismissive. Noted, he said, standing. We'll take it from here. To him, it sounded like bitterness. To me, it was math. And math always finishes the argument. That moment can sit heavy. So check in with yourself for a second. How are you feeling right now? Really, if you can. Try dimming the room lights or turning off a harsh screen. It's a small reset that actually helps your nervous system. Let me know where you're listening from. I always like knowing who's sitting with me in this story. And if this feels familiar, consider subscribing so you don't walk through the rest alone, because what happened after that smile is where things start to shift. I didn't walk out angry. I walked out carrying weight that had been stacking for years, the kind no metric ever records. My work lived in what never happened lawsuits that never landed, regulators who never escalated, clients who stayed because their worst moments were handled quietly. When a crisis surfaced, I absorbed it, rewrote processes, called favors, and chose containment over applause. I kept things calm so leadership could keep smiling. There were nights I stayed late not to fix errors, but to decide which truths needed immediate reporting and which needed careful, manual resolution, not to hide problems, but to keep them from detonating. Experience teaches you that timing matters. Silence, used responsibly, can protect people. I made those calls because someone had to, and because Logan Price wanted results without friction. Logan measured success in quarterly slides and polished language. He loved efficiency theater, the performance of control. I dealt with consequences that didn't fit on dashboards. When clients panicked, they didn't call the CEO, they called me. I listened, adjusted, promised nothing reckless, and delivered stability. That never showed up as growth. It showed up as survival. So watching Tom Reeves present his new dashboard felt surreal. He clicked through color-coded alerts, automated thresholds, and real-time scoring like it was a game. Logan leaned forward, impressed. This is clarity, he said. Tom talked about eliminating exceptions, standardizing responses, removing human hesitation. I saw the gaps immediately, the places where history mattered more than speed. I remembered accounts that looked small but carried long memories. Clients who forgave once, not twice. Situations where automation would escalate instead of soothe. I had handled those by hand, quietly, over years. None of that lived in Tom's charts. As the meeting wrapped, people filed out energized. I stayed seated, feeling the injustice tighten. My work had made the company look clean enough to modernize. Now it was being erased as inefficient. A colleague passed behind me and paused, close enough that only I could hear. "Freya," she whispered, not meeting my eyes. "Who's watching the old accounts now?" That question followed me out, heavier than any termination letter, because I already knew the answer. It wasn't anger that burned most, but the realization that my restraint had been mistaken for irrelevance. Years of choosing caution over credit had trained them to believe nothing serious existed. The smoother things looked, the easier it was to replace the person smoothing them. That was the injustice settling in not being fired, but being erased by the very calm I created. I carried that knowledge forward, knowing it would surface again when speed failed and memory demanded its overdue reckoning. Soon enough. Painfully so. I knew something was wrong before anyone said it out loud. The tone changed first. Meetings got faster, quieter, stripped of questions. Tom Reeves moved quickly, confident, announcing rollout dates instead of asking about history. "We're eliminating edge cases," he said in one session, smiling at his own decisiveness. Exceptions slow everything down. No one challenged him. Automation came in layers. Old flags were merged, thresholds standardized, manual review queues quietly retired. Alerts that once triggered careful phone calls were reclassified as noise. I watched from a distance as dashboards grew cleaner, calmer, almost elegant. Logan Price praised the numbers. "This is what progress looks like," he said. I felt a familiar tightening in my chest. Those exceptions Tom removed weren't inefficiencies. They were memory. Each one existed because something had gone wrong once. Quietly, expensively, and been resolved by hand. A late payment forgiven to avoid litigation. A reporting delay managed through back channels. None of that survived automation. History rarely does. A week later, an email landed in my personal inbox by mistake. A client thread, forwarded without checking recipients. The subject line was casual. The content was not. They were asking why their account no longer showed a familiar review note. "We've always handled this differently." The message read, "Is there a reason the process changed?" I didn't reply. I saved it. More followed. Old clients, confused by sudden uniformity. One wrote, "Your new system feels aggressive." Another asked if regulatory accommodations still applied. I archived everything. Intervening would have crossed lines I no longer had the right to cross. Silence was my only ethical option now. Then came the call. Not to the company, to me. "Freya," the client said carefully, "you handled our account for years. Can you tell me something off the record I didn't answer immediately? Are your obligations under the old reporting framework still being honored?" The question hung there, precise and dangerous. "I don't work there anymore," I said. "I can't speak for their current processes." My voice stayed even, but my hands were cold after we hung up. I sat still, listening to the hum of my refrigerator, feeling the weight of what had been set in motion. Automation had erased nuance without understanding why it existed. Tom had built speed without memory. Logan had applauded clarity without consequence. I didn't warn them. I didn't interfere. I organized what I had, labeled folders, and waited. Unease isn't panic, it's recognition. And I recognized this pattern well. When systems forget, reality reminds them. Not loudly, not immediately, but thoroughly, and without mercy. Every single time. Listen closely, the next small detail changed everything. The shift became visible the moment legal stopped looping me into emails. That silence felt louder than any accusation. I could tell something had surfaced because when problems repeat, lawyers start asking questions no dashboard can answer. What they found was not dramatic. Just persistent, the same type of customer complaint, appearing again and again over many years. Spaced far enough apart to avoid attention. Similar enough to form a pattern once someone finally looked. Legal called it a review. Logan Price called it noise. In a leadership meeting I was no longer invited to, he said, "We need to contain the narrative before this becomes a story." That phrase traveled fast. People repeated it in hallways like a shield. Contain implied control. Narrative implied spin. Neither addressed cause. Martin Hale. Outside counsel brought in to validate the findings. Didn't buy the framing. He requested historical context. Who handled these accounts previously, he asked. No one answered immediately. My name came up eventually. Awkwardly, like an afterthought. I wasn't there. But I heard about the pause. Pauses tell the truth better than speeches. What Martin found unsettled them. The complaints weren't identical, but they rhymed. Each had been resolved quietly, manually, without escalation. Each had ended with a satisfied client and no paper trail strong enough to trigger formal reporting. That wasn't negligence. It was judgment. Applied carefully, repeatedly, over time. Logan pushed back hard. If there was a real issue, it would have blown up already, he said. We followed policy. Martin didn't argue. He asked for documentation. That's when tension turned sharp. Documentation existed, but it lived in emails, notes, and human memory, not in automated systems. I received another misdirected message that night. An internal thread, marked urgent. Someone had typed a sentence that changed everything. Why were these never escalated? The question wasn't hostile. It was confused. Confusion is dangerous when lawyers are present. I sat at my kitchen table rereading it, feeling the slow reveal of a truth no one wanted. The system had worked because someone had been absorbing risk personally. Now that buffer was gone. And the pattern stood naked, stripped of context. The next morning, Logan doubled down. He instructed teams to stick to approved language and avoid speculation. Containment again. But containment doesn't erase history. It only delays accountability. I didn't celebrate. I didn't panic. I recognized the moment. When organizations discover patterns they ignored, the issue isn't wrongdoing, it's realization. And realization has momentum. Once it starts, it doesn't need help. It moves forward on its own, quietly connecting dots that were never meant to be connected. Until denial runs out of places to hide. The consequences were already unfolding. Logan Price didn't sound worried when the findings reached the executive floor. He sounded offended. In a recorded meeting, he said, "We did everything right." That line became doctrine overnight. It was repeated, defended, and weaponized against doubt. Confidence replaced curiosity. Questions suddenly felt disloyal in meetings now everywhere quietly. From the outside, the company looked disciplined and compliant. It followed policy, timelines, and approved language perfectly. Logan leaned on that relentlessly. Process, he argued, was protection. Anything else was emotional noise. His certainty filled rooms. It left no space for reflection or accountability later when facts changed inevitably fast. Tom Reeves tried to prove the certainty deserved. He adjusted thresholds, merged categories, refined triggers. Automation ran hotter and faster. Numbers improved on paper, but each fix stripped away context. Edge cases disappeared instead of resolving. Risk didn't vanish. It relocated into blind spots quietly that grew daily unchecked, unseen. I watched from a distance, unsettled by the speed. Every adjustment felt defensive, not thoughtful. Tom meant well, but he chased symmetry. Real systems aren't symmetrical. They carry scars. When automation polished them away, exposure followed. That truth was never debated. It was simply ignored because pride intervened too forcefully. The moment reporting obligations surfaced, denial hardened. Legal flagged timelines that no longer aligned. Logan dismissed the concern. We complied at the time, he said. That's what matters. The delayed trigger was framed as harmless. A technicality, not responsibility. That framing felt arrogant. It assumed consequences, respect intent, alone ever. Behind closed doors. Tension escalated. Fixes created more exposure. Each correction revealed older obligations. Containment became frantic. Then the board intervened. An independent audit was requested. Immediately, that decision cut through the confidence. Silence followed the announcement. No one applauded. Certainty evaporated. Pride suddenly looked fragile and dangerously loud there. I understood the shift instantly. Boards don't audit when they're comfortable. They audit when risk stops listening. Logan's confidence cracked, but he never admitted it. Resistance replaced explanation. That posture delayed answers, not outcomes. It only sharpened scrutiny. Truth advances faster under pressure. The audit ensured that, with certainty now, I felt no triumph watching this unfold. Only a steady confirmation. Processes matter, but humility matters more. I learned long ago that silence carries debt. When organizations spend it casually, payment comes later, usually with interest. That lesson never expires. Logan was learning it publicly, under scrutiny now, without protection. The audit request ended the argument. Everything after was process, not persuasion. Logan could resist people. He couldn't resist facts. Tom's systems were frozen for review. Leadership stopped smiling. Questions multiplied. That was the real reversal, not punishment, but inevitability. When pride meets structure, structure wins every single time eventually. The call came from a number I didn't recognize, which already told me it wasn't Logan Price. He never called unless he could control the outcome. This voice was careful, professional, and unfamiliar. The woman introduced herself as outside counsel retained by the board. And she spoke slowly, as if every word had weight. She wasn't asking me to return. She was asking me to speak. She made one thing clear immediately. I would not be representing the company. I would not be bound by internal messaging or loyalty. I was being invited as an independent witness with historical knowledge. That distinction mattered. It shifted the ground beneath everything that came before. Power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it simply changes direction. I agreed to listen, not out of vindication, but because accuracy matters. When we spoke later that afternoon, the first question was simple. Can you explain how these accounts were handled historically? I didn't rush. I answered precisely. Then I added the sentence they needed to hear. I can't explain history, not defend decisions. The line landed hard. Silence followed. Silence is confirmation. They asked about manual reviews, quiet resolutions, and timing. I explained why escalation wasn't always protection, and how judgment-filled gaps policy couldn't. I never criticized Logan. I didn't need to. Facts don't require tone. They require sequence. And sequence was something I understood better than anyone still inside that building. After the call ended, I learned Logan had been informed in advance. He knew they were speaking to me. He tried to frame it as procedural. He asked if I'd signed anything new. He asked if I'd be cooperative. What he couldn't do was stop it. Independent counsel answers to the board, not the CEO. That reality stripped authority down to its actual limits. A day later, another message arrived. This time directly. We just want context. Logan wrote. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just control reaching outward. Too late. I didn't respond. There was nothing to clarify privately that I'd already explained publicly. Under record. The shift was unmistakable. I wasn't defending myself anymore. I wasn't asking for fairness. I was answering questions others were finally required to ask. Logan could manage optics. He could influence tone. He could not rewrite timelines once they were spoken aloud by someone with nothing left to lose. That was the moment I felt it fully. The power had moved. Quietly. Cleanly. Not because I demanded it, but because structure demanded truth. And truth, once invited into the room, doesn't need permission to stay. For the first time, I understood why they hesitated to make that call. Once history speaks without restraint, authority shrinks, control dissolves. Decisions are judged in daylight. That reversal doesn't feel dramatic. It feels final, inevitable, and irreversible, like gravity rediscovering its pull again. I entered the conference room without notes, because everything I needed was already organized in my head. 10 years of decisions don't live on paper. They live in sequence. I wasn't there to perform or persuade. I was there to explain, calmly, how things had actually been done when consequences mattered more than appearances. They asked me to start at the beginning. I didn't. I started with the pattern. Certain accounts carried history, not volume. They came with regulators watching quietly, clients who remembered being mishandled elsewhere, and risks that escalated faster when exposed publicly. Those were handled manually, deliberately, and often without celebration. I explained that silence was not avoidance. It was control. I described nights spent choosing the least damaging option, documenting enough to protect the company, but not so much that we triggered unnecessary scrutiny. I didn't claim heroism. I claimed responsibility. Someone had to decide when process helped and when it harmed. I made those calls because no system could. No one interrupted me. That surprised me. I realized then that they weren't looking for justification. They were reconstructing memory. I spoke slowly, answering questions about timing, thresholds, and judgment. I never mentioned Logan Price by name. This wasn't about individuals. It was about continuity. When asked why issues weren't escalated sooner, I answered plainly, because escalation wasn't always safer. That line changed the room. I explained that compliance is not binary, it's contextual. Sometimes you prevent harm by slowing things down, not pushing them upward. That approach had worked, until it was removed. There was no anger in my voice. Anger clouds sequence. I focused on cause and effect. When manual review disappeared, risk didn't vanish. It surfaced. That wasn't sabotage. It was absence. Systems don't fail loudly at first. They fail quietly, then all at once. The legal team stepped aside briefly. When they returned, the lead counsel spoke carefully. Our preliminary conclusion is neglect, not fraud. The words landed with weight. Neglect implied omission. Fraud implied intent. That distinction mattered more than any apology. I felt no release, only confirmation. 10 years of restraint had been misread as nothing happening. In reality, something had been happening every day. It just wasn't visible. I answered a few final questions, thanked them, and stood. That was the controlled explosion, not rage, not accusation, just clarity arriving intact. I hadn't raised my voice or demanded recognition. I had simply returned context to a system that forgot why it existed. The damage was never in what I did. It was in what stopped being done. And now, finally, everyone in that room could see the full outline, unblurred, unavoidable, and impossible to ignore. Going forward now, the collapse didn't arrive as a headline. It arrived as silence. One morning, contract renewals stalled, inboxes froze, and meetings ended early without explanation. Clients didn't shout or threaten. They simply stopped signing. That quiet withdrawal spread faster than any scandal, because money leaves before anger speaks. No alarm sounded. Within days, formal notices followed. Longtime accounts cited concern over stability and compliance posture. Legal language replaced loyalty. I recognized the pattern immediately. When trust erodes, paperwork multiplies. Each cancellation triggered another review, another call, another internal meeting that solved nothing but confirmed momentum had turned against them completely now. The media noticed next. Articles appeared using phrases like delayed disclosure and governance gaps. Reporters quoted anonymous sources, never names. Logan dismissed it publicly, calling it misunderstanding. Privately, panic replaced certainty. Phones rang constantly. Communications drafted statements nobody believed, because repetition can't undo a timeline already written by facts alone. Inside the company, consequences accelerated. Tom Reeves was quietly removed from the automation project he once championed. His dashboards vanished from presentations. No announcement followed, just reassignment. Innovation. It turned out, offers little protection when its results create exposure instead of progress. Failure always travels upward eventually in corporate systems. Logan Price resisted until resistance became visible. Board meetings grew tense. Questions sharpened. Then the decision came without ceremony. Leadership change. Effective immediately. The man who preached control lost it quietly. Authority doesn't disappear dramatically, it thins, then collapses under accumulated weight of ignored details and delayed responsibility over time. Clients reacted faster than executives expected. More contracts paused. Some terminated outright. Each decision cited risk tolerance, not emotion. That distinction mattered. This wasn't outrage, it was calculation. Organizations forgive mistakes. They rarely forgive uncertainty, especially when it appears systematic and unmanaged across multiple years without transparent explanation provided consistently. Only later did the board articulate the uncomfortable truth. In closed session, they acknowledged what I had been without naming it. I wasn't excess. I was insulation. A human buffer absorbing friction so leadership could operate cleanly and unchallenged, while risk accumulated silently beneath decisions no one reviewed carefully enough. That realization didn't restore anything. It explained the damage. Boards exist to recognize patterns executives miss. This one arrived late but intact. By then, consequences were irreversible. Systems had adapted to absence, not presence. And adaptation always favors survival over loyalty, especially during periods of institutional stress and scrutiny intensifying. I watched the dominoes finish falling without satisfaction. Collapse isn't justice. Understanding is. The company didn't fail because of one decision. It failed because protection was mistaken for waste. When the buffer vanished, impact followed. That sequence never changes regardless of industry. Size, leadership, technology, confidence, intent, timing, optics, ambition. The call came late, after the headlines had cooled, but before the damage settled. I recognized the number this time. Logan Price didn't bother with pleasantries. "We need to talk," he said, as if authority could be resurrected by tone alone. He spoke about misunderstanding, pressure, timing. He said the board had moved too fast. He said my role had been mischaracterized. Then he made the offer. A senior position, expanded scope, a chance to stabilize what remained. "We value your experience," he said carefully. "We always did." I let the silence stretch. Silence is useful when someone is negotiating against reality. When I finally answered, my voice was calm. "You fired me for convenience, not performance." The line wasn't accusation, it was diagnosis. Logan inhaled sharply, then recovered. "That's not fair," he said. "We followed process." There it was again. Process as absolution, I reminded him, gently. That process doesn't equal judgment. He insisted circumstances had changed. I agreed. They had. Power had changed hands, and urgency had found him late. He pivoted. "Name your terms," he said. That was the moment I felt it, not anger, not triumph, but distance. I no longer wanted restitution. I wanted separation. I told him I wouldn't return. Not now, not later, not under any title. Logan's voice tightened. "You're leaving us exposed," he said. "You know how this works," I corrected him. I know how it worked. Exposure wasn't created by my absence. It had been revealed by it. That distinction mattered. He asked what I wanted instead. I told him nothing from his company. The truth unsettled him more than rejection. He paused, then asked the question he should have asked months earlier. "Where will you go?" I answered honestly. "An advisory role, independent, fully disclosed, with a competitor who had approached me after the audit became public. Legal, clean, contractual. They want perspective," I said, "not containment." He went quiet. When he spoke again, it was softer. I wish we'd listened. I believed him. Regret can be sincere and still useless. Timing decides value. When the call ended, I felt no rush. Just a steady satisfaction, not revenge. Resolution. The system had corrected itself without my forcing it. I hadn't won against Logan. I had moved beyond him. And that, I realized, was the only outcome that ever truly lasts. I later signed the agreement with clear terms. Clear boundaries. and no emotion attached. Advisory work suits truth better than loyalty ever did. I don't protect reputations anymore. I protect patterns. Watching Logan lose leverage confirmed something simple. Authority borrowed from silence collapses once silence is gone. That lesson followed me forward, steady and permanent, like a compass finally aligned. It reminded me why restraint outlasts noise, and why quiet exits often become the strongest entries in the end. I didn't celebrate the verdict, because it never came with a gavel. It arrived quietly, spread across weeks of restructuring memos and cautious press statements. My former company survived. Technically, but its authority did not. Titles changed, committees multiplied, and trust never fully returned. Reputation, once cracked, doesn't reseal. I started my next chapter without drama. Advisory work suited me. I was invited into rooms where questions mattered more than optics, where history was treated as an asset instead of clutter. I spoke when asked, declined when needed, and slept better knowing my judgment no longer served someone else's ambition. Occasionally, I read updates about the company I left. They announced new leadership, revised policies, renewed commitments. None mentioned the years before. Silence remained their preferred language. Clients noticed. So did partners. Credibility doesn't vanish overnight, but it thins, decision by decision, until weight replaces confidence. What surprised me was the calm. I expected anger to linger, some echo of injustice demanding attention. Instead, there was clarity. The system hadn't punished anyone out of spite. It had simply removed protection and allowed reality to operate without interference. That felt like justice, the kind that doesn't need applause. I thought often about the board's realization, arriving late but accurate. They hadn't lost a manager. They had lost a buffer, someone who absorbed friction so leaders could move quickly. When that role disappeared, consequences finally touched the surface. Nothing mystical, just cause-meeting effect. There was no victory lap, only alignment. My work now is quieter, but more honest. I'm asked to remember, to connect, to slow things down when speed threatens understanding. Experience isn't nostalgia. It's memory applied responsibly. I didn't burn bridges. I walked away from them once they stopped leading anywhere. Peace came from knowing I hadn't been erased. I had been revealed. Time did the rest, quietly recalibrating priorities, exposing weak assumptions, and rewarding patience. I learned that fairness isn't loud or fast. It's cumulative, built through restraint, consistency, and choices made long before recognition arrives without shortcuts or noise. Data remembers. People forget. That's why experience matters. What this story taught me is simple, but it took years to learn. Real value isn't loud, visible, or instantly rewarded. It lives in the things that don't happen because someone chose patience, responsibility, and restraint. Experience isn't about holding power, it's about carrying memory, and knowing when silence protects more than speed ever could. As you listened, how did it make you feel? Did it leave you uneasy, relieved, or quietly validated? And which detail stayed with you the most, the moment of dismissal, the missing data, or the realization that calm work often goes unseen? I'd love to know where you're listening from right now. Drop a comment and share your thoughts. Your perspective adds meaning to this story. If it resonated with you, please like and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And consider subscribing, so we can keep exploring these moments of quiet justice together.